Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. I'm Jem Hawkes and today we're going to be working with beautiful caged crystal beads. Now I've got a whole bunch of different sizes to work with, but if you have all the same size crystal bead, I have a design for you also. So it's very much catwalk couture when you connect just the large ones together, but what you can do is have a number of different sizes to play with. If you'd like to join me down on the board, I'll show you a little bit more closely the type of caged crystal bead we're going to work with. So I have a couple of different sizes and a couple of different colourways. I've got a gold colourway, a gunmetal colourway, a silver colourway and a rose gold colourway as well. Now they all blend perfectly together. I'm a massive fan of mixing metal types and colours together. I also quite like mixing copper and sterling silver as well. There are no rules. You can do exactly what you want when you're creating your own jewellery. So what we have are individually soldered or welded joints and a whole bunch of geometric shapes to join together. Inside each of these is a frankly vast crystal bead. Now these are undrilled. We're going to be working using the points that have been soldered. They're nice and strong. And I do love the shape of the crystal that's inside the cage. It's a very classic, almost brilliantine cut. It's delightful to work with, and they do work ever so well because what you'll see is that the light reflects inside those. These are crystal glass, but they do react ever so beautifully inside, and especially when you're mixing metals, you get a real sparkle fest going on there. So the technique that we're going to learn can be applied in so many different ways. I've also added in, let's see if they spill on the floor today, they often do, some Thunder Polish glass crystal beads. Now these fit perfectly on your 20 gauge wire, which is approximately equivalent to 0.8mm. Now if you want to work with heavier wire, if you think you're going to enjoy the aesthetic of that more, then you'll just need to size up your beads. These work perfectly on the 20 gauge, but you can of course change up any aspect of the design. So I've just unstranded a couple of these. I have also added in just a couple of lengths of chain reaction. Now there are so many different colourways and styles with the chain reaction chains. I have very simply used this one as a hanging medium, purely because it reflects the glitter and glamour of these beautiful caged crystal beads. Look at the colour. Really beautiful on there. So on the other necklace, which I shall take off my neck and pop on the board in just a moment, I've graduated different colourways as well, but I've used the same beads again. On this drop design, we're moving down in size, in the caged crystal bead size. I'm also moving down in the number of beads that I've popped on the little connector. So what we're going to learn is how to make this beaded connector to join securely the caged crystal beads together. And I had just a little tiny bit spare left over from that chain reaction chain. So I popped a little dropper down on the bottom. So there's the one piece that we've made. I'm now just going to bring down the second piece to the board. Pop this one out of the way for a hot second. This one has got 3 of the largest pieces down at the centre, and I've actually matched the colours opposite on this one. So we've got a gunmetal, we've got the gold colour, gunmetal again, silver colour, and then the rose gold colour. And what I've done with this design is kept to 3 crystals on each of those connecting bars. And this is an over the head design, another piece of beautiful chain reaction. As I say, I've used 2 different types today. These are very cool because you can either cut or open those links and just add to or cut out exactly how much you need. So there's just a couple of little bits extra of the chain reaction added in. But the main feature of today's tutorial are these absolutely magnificent caged crystal beads. So whether you like to have a little bit more subtlety in your jewellery or you want to go for the full-on glamour, This is definitely a statement piece that I'm wearing today. Then you have so many options with Jessie James beads, and that's one of the things I love about being involved with the Jessie James Beads Company. There is absolutely 100% something for everyone to love. So today I'm going to show you how to connect those caged crystal beads together. I just want to extend my heartfelt Happy New Year's to you all, from here in the United Kingdom to you wherever you might be around the world. I hope that you've had a beautiful day so far. Just very, very quickly to reprise the materials. If you want to, you can add in some chain reaction. I'm going to be using some Thunder Polish crystal. Glass crystal. This colourway, if you need to know, is 4mm round twisted in 4 RT53. That's 4 Romeo Tango 53. If you want to recreate the exact piece, that's what we're working with. Now I'm going to be demonstrating today with some raw copper in 20 gauge or 0.8 approximately millimeters. It's very, very similar to your artistic wire. You could either use the German style or the artistic. Both will work for this design. We're going to be warming that wire up before we work with it anyway, so both of those wire tempers are going to be absolutely perfect for your needs. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Let's get back down to that board and let's learn how to connect those caged crystal beads together in a drop formation. So I'm just going to pop my demonstration piece up at the top of the board, like so. And although my piece up here has got 4 beads graduating down in size, I managed to find a 5th size in my box of Happy Happy Joy Joys. So we're going to create a drop design with those graduating sizes of the caged crystal beads, and we're going to have a differing number of beads set between them on those connectors. So for the first part of the tutorial, I'm going to start up between the largest and the second largest, and I'm going to just count very, very quickly. If I need 1 bead here, I'll need 2 beads here, 3 beads here, so 4 beads up at the top. So just make sure that you do have enough of your chosen beads, and indeed that they will go onto your wire of choice. Now these are twisted beads, which means that you get a little bit of extra sparkle. Now I've cut around about 6 inches of some 20 gauge wire. It's round wire. Wherever possible, I like to work in round wire because my tutorials are generally aimed for beginners, people who are newer to wire work. And in that way, the round wire is super easy to work with. You don't have to worry about it twisting. So I've given that a really lovely warm between thumb and forefinger, just to get that nice and fluid. What we're going to do to begin with is come about 1.5 inches from one end and put quite a firm right angle just over the end there. It's around about 1.5 inches from the end, and then I'm going to create a circular form. I'm going to do that by rotating the pliers around to get that first half of the shape. Pop those pliers back in and then draw the end of the wire around. Now hopefully you can see on my pliers that what I've done is I've created that in a spiral shape where there's a large gap down the centre, and there's a reason for that. When we're working to create connectors, we need to make sure that it's easy for us to access this point. Now this 20 gauge wire is a little bit softer and a little bit more fluid than your 18 gauge. So we will need to firm up that shape just very, very gently. I'm going to pinch it small amount at a time just to make sure that that's in the round formation that I'm looking for and it has a little extra strength. Now what I found when I was connecting my cage beads is that the cleanest way for me to do that, instead of it being on a bar, if you connect the cage beads on a bar, what can happen is that they will move and slide around. So what I've done is I've connected them at a point where they won't be able to do that. Another thing that I found as I tried and then took apart and tried again to create this design that I'd had in my head for a little while is that the best way to go through was between 2 triangles that are joined together at the point rather than between 2 squares. It seems to hang more cleanly. Don't know why. I am not a mathematician. I certainly don't remember any of the trianguli Pythagoras stuff. So I think we've all realised that I'm not a mathematician. So I'm going to take the short tail of wire that's coming from that circular form at the end. I'm going to post that in through one section, one of the triangles, and I'm going to just push that all the way through so that it comes out through the other triangle tip. So if I just draw that over to one side, you can see quite clearly where we have captured the first of our caged crystals. So if I just tilt that around, you should be able to see that quite neatly. The next thing that we're going to do is to just tighten up that shape, and I'm going to use just my fingers to push that into position. So I've completed the circular form that is going through the pointed side of the triangles. Now, because the caged crystals are loose, you can obviously move that around to your heart's content. What I'm going to do next is make this as easy as I possibly can for myself. I'm going to turn it into the clearest orientation for you, which is upwards. And then what I'm going to do is grip a hold of the circular form that we created together with our 20 gauge or 0.8mm wire. When I'm gripping a hold of the circular form, what I'm doing is I'm only touching with my flat facing bent chain nose pliers where there's a single pass of wire. So if I hold that like so, you'll see that you can get in there and you can just grip that just enough to make a safe connection with that form. What we're not doing is putting any pressure on the weld or the solder mark, and we're not crushing down where the two pieces of wire cross over. We're holding across the centre of a circular form. The next thing I'm going to do is wrap the tail, the cut tail of that wire, around the neck of the elongated piece that we're working with. So I'm going to start by pulling that around really firmly by hand, and just getting that to be as neat a coil as I possibly can. Now, one of the beauties of working with that slightly lighter gauge wire, rather than working in an 18 gauge, is that you can do much of this by hand. When that starts to become painful, we can switch to using a second pair of either bent chain or chain nose pliers. What I'm going to do is just give that a bit of a tighten up. And to do that, I'm going to put one of the ends of my pliers inside the circular form and the other end of my pliers just over the top of the coil we've created. And I'm just going to draw that cautiously and carefully down just to tighten that coil up. Now, if you are looking to make an element of symmetry in your jewellery, which is quite desirable oftentimes, unless you're making something really jumbly, which is lovely too, I'm just going to tighten this up on the other side as well. It's kind of a good idea to try to keep the same number of coils on your connectors. What you may notice on some of these is that I didn't manage to do that. There's 5 at the top here, 4 at the bottom there, so I kind of failed. So I'm giving you the benefit of having done this and not completely nailing it, to be honest. What I'm going to do is try to keep this to 3 wraps on either end of the connector. So the next thing I need to do is just tidy up this cut end by trimming away the very end section. We're just losing a very small amount here, and I'm just going to put my finger over the end as I cut so that this doesn't ping up and whack me in the eyeball, because that is not sounding like fun, to be quite honest. Now, to just tidy away, you can see there's an elevated bit at the end of the wire just here. So what we need to do is just tidy that away by rotating around in the same direction as that springy coil. Once you've tidied that up a little bit, you can give that coil a last little squish just to make that sit as neatly as you possibly can. Now I'm just going to run thumb and forefinger over that wire to give a little bit of extra fluidity. If there are any kinks in your wire, it will make it slightly more difficult for smaller hold beads to just slide on down. Now these are pretty fluid over the 20 gauge wire or the 0.8 approximately millimeter wire, but if you are working with beads that are very tight in terms of their drill hole aspect, then having the wire smooth and as straight as possible is key to an easy life. It's always so much fun watching me put beads onto wire because I just can't really see it, if I'm completely honest with you. There we go. So I'm going to slide those 4 beads down, and do you remember we just counted if we're going to end up with a single bead between the smallest and the second smallest, there would be 1 bead, 2 beads, 3 beads, 4 beads. So it depends on how many you want to connect together. You don't even have to go through the graduation process if you don't want to. It's absolutely up to you, completely and 100% personalizable, customizable, and absolutely just for you. So we're going to now join on our second caged crystal bead. So I'm going to turn this in the same orientation as we started. Now, just because I have hung mine large to small doesn't mean to say that that's the way it has to be. You can absolutely hang small to large. It depends where this is going to go. It would be quite a lovely piece to hang from a curtain finial as well. Probably wouldn't be strong enough in use, especially if there are small children in the home, to use as a light pole. But it is quite a decorative and lovely thing to have hanging around. Now, one word of caution: in Britain we don't tend to have sun strong enough. But in other places around the world, if you hang these where sun shines, you may create a fire hazard if you allow the light to pass through the crystal and directly onto a flammable material. If you get such hot sun, I'm kind of jealous, if I'm honest. So when I'm going to be connecting my crystal beads together, I want to think about whether or not I want to have the same face of the bead showing to me all the way down. If you take a quick look at the demonstration piece, what you have here is a twist in the connector, and I just did that before we came on to the show, just to show you what it looks like if you don't orient your loops on either end of the connector correctly. So these ones down at the bottom, they're all oriented so that there's a square shape facing forwards. So if that doesn't happen for you, you've got maybe one time, she says, hoping it doesn't crack, that you can just twist that connector and correct the issue. And what you'll see is the connectors all have their loops facing in the same direction. And that's what we must do now if we want to always have the same shape facing forwards. Obviously, if you turn that over one and hang it, you would then always have triangles. But the idea is, by going through the same aperture, which is the triangle rather than the square, is you can control what that's going to look like when it hangs down. So if you're random, then go for your life. You know, you do you. The thing about crafting your own jewellery and home decor items with such beautiful Jessie James beads is that it's completely within your control to decide what goes where. So what I'm going to do is just take a look at my piece so far, and I can see that the square is facing forwards, and therefore I want to repeat that onto the next size down. So I'm going to pop my bent chain nose pliers underneath and just hold this in the correct orientation so that the circular form is facing up and the square on the caged crystal bead is also facing up. Now, before I turn a bend in the wire, I'm going to imagine how much wire I need to get the same number of coils outside of that round connector form. So you could, if you really wanted to, you could measure that. You could bring in some kind of tape measure or a short measuring device to just make sure that that's exactly the same. I'm going to eyeball it, but be aware that eyeballing gives you uneven links sometimes. So I'm going to turn a right angle, bearing in mind the right angle wire needs to be in the same orientation as the first round form that we made, which is up at the top with the largest connector. So I'm going to take those bent chain nose pliers away and just hold on to those beads for a second. I need to now create another one of those round forms. So I'm going to try to remember whereabouts on my pliers I created that round form. Create that first half circular shape, pop those pliers back in, grip firmly and take the wire around. Remembering, to make our life easy, we're kind of spiraling up towards the narrower part of the tip of those pliers just to make access slightly easier. If you forget to do that and you end up with a complete circle, don't worry. After you've finished just giving that a little bit of a strengthen, you can very easily open that out. I'm always trying to think of ways in which we do less with our hands and our wrists. I suffer with arthritis, and therefore if I can reduce a step, then I absolutely will. It means I can make jewellery for much longer. So what we're going to do now is add in our second caged crystal bead from Jessie James Beads. So I'm going to take a hot look at this, and I'm going to imagine that I need to pop the wire in through one triangle and out through another triangle. So if I pop the wire through like so, and that's just going to slide all the way through the end, I'm just going to allow that to flip around, and I'm going to hold that for a second and just make sure that I'm seeing what I expect to see, which is the two square aspects of that bead. As I said, if you do make a mistake, you've got maybe one opportunity to rectify that once the whole piece is assembled. Because we warm our wire first, it does give it just a little bit of extra life. So again, to repeat the first part of this technique, I'm just going to squish down that wire to complete the circular form. And I'm going to pop back in with my bent chain nose pliers to hold just across the centre of that round form that we created together. Now I've just noticed that my round form is slightly off to one side, so I can just very carefully move that around so that it sits on the end of the connector rather than off to one side. That's a little bit more centralised now. So I'm going to pull those beads out of the way and grab a hold of that round form. Now again, I'm not putting any pressure on the weld joint, nor am I putting any pressure on the glass crystal bead. So I'm trying to keep this as still as possible and taking the tail all the way around. Now that's a very, very open spiral I've created just there. So what I need to do is carefully and cautiously close that up a little bit, pop those pliers back into position and complete my third wrap. All the while trying not to twonk the camera or bash the beads onto the floor. So I've got my third wrap going around the neck of the connector. If you feel that you needed a little bit more, you can take that further around. We're just going to trim away the excess of wire now, like so. Always look twice and cut once. Just take a moment to make sure that your cutters are on the correct piece of wire. Now when I'm working with both welded joints and with glass beads, what I need to do is be sure I'm not putting any pressure on anything. So the cage bead is absolutely fine. The risk at this stage is that I might chip the glass bead, so I'm going to be incredibly respectful and just tuck that down very, very carefully. So you can see here that we have square form facing upwards on both of these pieces, in where they will hang more like so. So you'll see square at the top, square at the bottom, coming out in a 3D formation towards you. Looks a bit like a TIE fighter at the moment, which is great. So what I'm going to do now is connect these other pieces with slowly fewer numbers of beads on the connector between them, but it will always be in the same orientation. So we'll be making a loop, connecting the loop through the triangle to the triangle, adding on a reduced number of beads, so 4 for that first drop, 3 for the next drop, and so on and so forth. And then down at the bottom you have the option whether you want to add a dangle or another length of chain. I really, really love to see a length of chain or chain tassel hanging away at the bottom of funky jewellery, especially something that's quite so glitzy and glamorous as this. I'll have a look and see if I can find some. If not, you can always add a few beads just on a head pin or something down at the bottom, just to put almost like a punctuation point there, or you can treat your teeny tiny bead as the punctuation point. So I've showed you how to create a connector. All we'll need to do is reduce, reduce, reduce until we end up with one bead down at the bottom. And then in a couple of minutes, when I've connected this all together, I'll come back to you and show you how to put a little tiny simple bail up at the top. Well, thank you very much for bearing with me. I've just connected all of those 5 beautiful caged crystal beads together in exactly the same way. And if you join me back down at the board, I'll show you what that looks like and how to add yourself a bail up at the top. So we've got all of the similar faces of the caged crystal beads from Jessie James all facing in the same direction. One thing I will say is when you choose that connection point and you're going from the triangle to the triangle, when you pick up your bead to add the lower section, do check that it is opposite. You will find that there are square to square opposite each other, and there are triangle to triangle opposite each other. If you do what I did during one of my practice sessions, is I connected one of the lower beads to a completely different triangle, and it hung very, very strangely indeed. So obviously that can be something that you want to play with. If you decide that that's how you want it to hang, then that is indeed how you should hang your beads. But just take a second, and as you rotate the beads around, you'll see that that is indeed at opposite points. They're very, very cool little creations indeed. So let's get this oriented so that the squares are all facing upwards. And what we're going to do is take a slightly heavier wire now. I have around about 6 inches here of 18 gauge round. This is raw copper, but you could just as easily use your silver wire in the 18 gauge, which is equivalent approximately to 1 millimetre. So the first thing I'm going to do, if I just scooch that up the board slightly, is I'm going to give that a really lovely, nice warm through. Now we can stand to lose, because we're working with a good length of wire here, you can stand to lose a little bit by gripping it firmly at the end. If you need to trim that away, then that is not a problem at all. We're going to come probably around 2.5 inches from one end and just put a lovely right angle on that wire. And I'm going to be using my stepped bail making pliers from Beaded now. I would think probably quite a large, maybe number 5 or number 6 on the stepped bail making pliers. Let's go for number 5, and I'm going to use the exact same technique where I rotate the pliers around whilst gripping on the wire past that right angle. Pop those back in, and then I finish that off with the wire twisting around the mandrel or the pliers, or in this case the bail makers, so however you want to make that work for you. So I've got a super sized loop up at the top, and the reason I make them super sized is if I want to hang this from a piece of the chain reaction. Sometimes they have quite large crystals or stations, so I want to be able to move my bail smoothly over whatever size chain I want to hang it from, or hanging material, whatever you want to use. So what we're going to do now is a glorified wrapped loop, and it's a really good opportunity to show you up close and personal on a slightly larger size just how the operation works. So I'm going to hold across the circular form, and I'm not squashing where anything might be attached on this side, and I'm not putting any pressure on where the two wires cross over. Now a little bit of extra heat just on the wire underneath here goes a very long way. What I'm going to do now is start to twist that around the neck of the wire. Now you'll see that this does indeed take a much firmer hand to get that moving than the 20 gauge that we were working with a little while ago. So there's a little openness just here, so I'm just going to close that down straight away. If you want to use a technique using 2 pairs of pliers, having broad bullet tip flat pliers or chain nose pliers, whichever works for you, whichever you have easily available. I'm going to support the circular form with my non-dominant hand, and I'm going to continue wrapping with that pre-warmed 18 gauge wire around the neck. And what I think I'll do for this one is give that a good few turns. I think I'll go for 4.5 turns there. Give that a bit of a squeeze. This is the alternative fashion, which is by using a second pair of pliers. So you can just carefully move that around, and to tighten up the coil, we're just going to give that a very gentle squish just to get that nice and neat and tidy. So what we can do if we desire to, and this is by no means something that you have to do, you could very simply trim away the tail of wire. We're going to put a small coil which is going to sit up and over the face of that little bail that we're making. So my preference is to coil away from me. It doesn't really matter at this stage because you have the opportunity to just turn the coil over whenever you wish to. So I've got that coil started just there. That went slightly out of vision. I'm just going to turn that up and start moving it down towards the neck of the design. It's a very tiny coil, and I'm just going to place that over the face of our coil like so, just as a bit of extra decoration. If you do that and you don't like it, like I don't particularly think that looks very neat, you could take a little longer to get that neat and tidy. If you make yourself a coil and you think actually I'd much prefer not to have it, make sure that you're cutting the correct piece of wire and just trim that away, and then we'll just neaten up the end. You don't have to put coils on everything. A lot of my male clients prefer to have small coils or no coils on their pendants. so you can obviously design that exactly how you want to. I'm now going to put some heat into the remaining wire, which we're going to add onto the top of our uppermost caged crystal bead. Now you could obviously hang from the tiniest one down to the largest one. I kind of like it in the other way because it just resembles to me something like an icicle. It's a little bit more nature made, but obviously you can design exactly how you want to. You can mess around with the numbers, you can mess around with the sizes and colours, endless variations with Jessie James Beads caged crystal beads. So once I put a little bit of warmth into that remaining wire, I'm going to pop the pliers underneath. Now I want my beading or threading material rather to go through in this orientation. So I'm going to turn the wire in the same orientation that the threading material or hanging material or necklace or whatever you're going to use, ribbon needs to go through this way. So that's the same orientation that we've twisted the wire to. That's a very, very soft bend. I haven't done a terribly good job there. So I'm just going to pop those pliers back in and try harder. That's a little bit better. Now I'm going to use my round nose pliers again because that's what I used for each one of these connectors. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as I've done before, which is to twist those around, take the tail of wire all the way through. Now, one thing that I didn't think too hard about is whether or not this is going to work going through the two triangles. So here is proof of the pudding. We're going to put the loop into position. So harden up that loop shape first. Just get that over a plain background. Harden up the loop shape, open it up. We're going to make sure that it's going to go through the correct segment. So if I was to hang it from here, wouldn't look very nice at all. It would hang all wonky. So I need to find the point that it is exactly opposite where the next piece hangs down. So if you rotate the cage around, you should be able to find that point quite easily. So I'm going to look at the two triangles that I've got to work with, just up at the top here. I'm going to pass the wire in through one triangle and out through the other triangle, like so. I'm going to allow that to sit down into position. Now, because we warmed this wire, what will happen is we will have an opportunity to twist this if we're unhappy with the orientation when we get there. So I just need to do the final wrapped loop of today's tutorial. So I'm going to support the loop shape, and I'm not pressing down on the wire or on the solder or weld joint. So I'm going to take the tail all the way around and wrap that a good couple of times until I've filled that gap in the centre. I'm going to give that a bit of a squeeze just to tighten it up for a second so that my two coils have met in the middle. Now what I need to do is to check what orientation I want to have facing forwards. And we've talked all the way through about having the squares facing forwards. So my loop at the top is slightly out of skew. So I'm just going to twist that one time to get it to sit in the correct orientation. The last thing I'm going to do is add a giant coil to sit over the front of that bail, just to make it a little bit fancier. So I need to be quite cautious so that I don't accidentally crush any of these crystals. Add some heat into this last little bit of wire that we've got up on the bail. I think I'll take that to around about 2 inches. Get that residue tucked away and then start coiling up my coil forwards this time, using the tip of those round nose pliers on the very end of the wire. You may need to open and close the pliers a couple of times just to get that to work for you until you get the start of a loop shape. And then I'm going to just push backwards against my finger. This is my non-dominant hand. I'm pushing into the non-dominant hand using very, very small arcs of movement and keeping the coil flat. It's in the same plane as the desk is. And in that way we're going to end up with a much neater coil than I did first time around. I'm just going to keep turning that until I get as much coil as I decide looks attractive. And we're just going to reorientate our pendant drop onto the table just to make sure that we're happy with how that looks. And this is the point at which I'm going to decide where that coil is going to sit. So if I bring the coil all the way around to the front and just push that up against the bail. Now it won't sit properly on the desk, but you can see you just need to just push that into position, make it give in to your demands, and then you can just ensure that the orientation is correct on the loop. Push the coil down into position, and hopefully what we might do is just borrow the bead dish just to rest that in so that it sits a little bit more pleasantly. And you can see the piece that we've made together today. And then there's the other example, to which I added a very, very simple offcut from one of those chain reactions. And then if you pop back up to the board with me, we will have pop back up to me rather. Hello, I'm still here. You can see what an alternative you can make. So this is graduated down in size, and then there are matching colours on either side. Lots of fun that you can have with your Jessie James beads, caged crystal beads. Well, it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you here today at Jessie James. My name is Jem. I'm coming to you from the United Kingdom, and I do hope to see you again very, very soon. Bye for now.